you better get out your spatulas because Oregon flipped 2 All-Americans on signing day, and we're breaking it down on today's episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast. If you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. I am fired up, folks. It's been a heck of a day for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks on the recruiting trail, day 1 of the 3-day early signing period. And man, we got some fireworks to dive into on today's episode. I'm not rolling solo, though. I am so glad to be joined by Ducks Digest writer Israel LaRue, who's been doing some great work for us over on the site lately. How we doing, man? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm good, Max. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about all the exciting recruits that we had today.
Yeah, it's been a crazy, crazy day. I know you're out on the East Coast right now with some family, but I got up early just to kind of dive into everything. So our time zones are a little bit off, but thankfully we have technology to kind of get us together here. But I want to talk about the big items of the day, specifically on the prep side of things, on the high school side of things. The Ducks did also land a commitment from Kansas State safety Kobe Savage, which is a huge addition for the secondary in 2024, but we'll come out with an episode on that later. Let's start things off talking about Jeremiah McClellan, because the 2024 St. Louis, Missouri Christian Brothers wide receiver flipped his commitment from Ohio State to Oregon, which is a crazy thing to say because Ohio State, let's just call it what it is a wide receiver factory. So we don't see Ryan Day and certainly not Brian Hartline lose out on top wide receiver commits, but Oregon goes in to steal a top commit from what is now a conference rival. What do we think, man? What were kind of your reactions here?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about that flip, you kind of put into question about what's going on at Ohio State. You look at the quarterback position. It's not really the best in the country. And then you look at Oregon's quarterback room. I mean, you got Dylan Gabriel and now Dante Moore backing him up. So I think McClellan, he's kind of looking at the quarterback room at Oregon. And he's like, hey, I mean, I can make something happen right here. Ohio State, they definitely do develop receivers, but maybe I can get in earlier than the other guys that I would be behind at Ohio State, and play with a great veteran quarterback with Dylan Gabriel, and even then develop that relationship with Dante Moore these next couple years.
Yeah, you talked about the quarterback room in both of these schools. Certainly interesting to find ourselves in this kind of a situation. Certainly after Ohio State just produced CJ Stroud, who I think was the number 2 pick in last year's draft, and is just having a great year with the Texans. And then Kyle McCord comes in, and the Buckeyes had a really good year record-wise, but it just kind of always felt throughout the year like they were a little bit lacking there at the quarterback spot. And it's crazy how small and how slim the margin for error is, because once they lost to Michigan, I think that was kind of what, unraveled their season. You could say that to a similar degree with Oregon, right? When they lost to Washington for a second time in the Pac-12 title game, and there was a playoff berth on the line. The wind kind of felt like it came out of the sails there, but I think I've said it before, losing that game, I think it just made Dan Lanning and the Ducks push the gas pedal down even harder when it comes to recruiting. But Jeremiah McClellan, for people who don't know about him, I've talked about him numerous times on the podcast, but he's coming in the updated 247 Sports composite as a 4-star recruit, 0.9766, the number 49 overall player in the country, number 13 wide receiver, and the number 3 recruit in the state of Missouri. In case you guys aren't watching us on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, we got some film on the screen for you guys right now so you can see what the Ducks are getting in this big-time pass catcher. I know that one of the things that stands out about McClellan is his physical frame. I think that he comes just kind of ready to go at the college level, 6 foot, 190 pounds, great route runner, and he can do a lot aside from just creating separation. Great ball skills, can do a little bit after the catch clearly as well. But I'm super excited about this signing for the Ducks, Israel, because you just need big time playmakers, and to steal a top commit from the Buckeyes going into the Big Ten. I mean, you can't really draw it up better than that for the Ducks.
It definitely does send a message, Max. And I mean, you talk about his size, his speed, but what stands out to me is his catch radius. I mean, you're looking at the film right here, and anything that goes his way, he's going to catch it, whether it's over the head, right in front of him, fingertips. You mentioned it, he's going to catch the ball if it's near him. So, I mean, that's a big pickup for Oregon. And then you talk about that wide receiver room. I mean, they had five pickups today for National Signing Day. So that's huge for their wide receiver room going into the Big Ten. And then you mentioned it, going into the Big Ten, taking a top recruit from Ohio State. That's going to definitely make some heads turn around in Columbus.
No doubt about it. And I've talked previously as well about how Missouri is going to be a really big piece of what Oregon wants to do on the recruiting trail. Not even just offensively in the 2024 class. The Ducks also went into the St. Louis area where McClellan's from to sign Hazelwood Central standout defensive lineman Tion Gray from Hazelwood Central, excuse me. And this is Dan Lanning's home state. And I think that kind of went into the decision here, right? With the relationship that he was able to build with Jeremiah. And I think as we were kind of getting closer and closer to these final hours, and I was thinking to myself, could Oregon really pull this one off? I wasn't necessarily getting a lot of intel. I mean, I knew that they had a very realistic shot and they were certainly involved. They had gone out to see him on the recruiting trail with an in-home visit or at school visit. I don't know which one it was, but they went out to see him. And I was just thinking to myself, well, Junior Adams is a really, really good recruiter. I think he'd kind of been just lurking behind the scenes in the 24 class after the Ducks lost Jordan Anderson. And then you had Dylan Gresham taking some of these official visits. We can talk a little bit about that later. I know you had a story on it, but Junior Adams is a great recruiter. You put that in, you look at what the Ducks have been able to do at the wide receiver spot with Troy Franklin breaking program records this year. And then you add into all of that Dan Lanning is from Missouri. I think that those guys might just mean a little bit more, especially given the context and where the class was at the wide receiver spot.
Yeah, and you talked about it, having that Missouri pipeline. I mean, Oregon, the past couple of years, they've definitely had that SoCal pipeline. They're trying to get into that Texas market. When you talk about Rowan McKinley, he's a Texas guy. He's always talking about the Ducks wanting more Texas recruits for Oregon. And then adding Missouri with Lanning being from there. I mean, that's huge. The more markets you can tap into as a school, the better you're going to get, the better talent you're going to get.
I think I'm not really that good when it comes to player comps. I feel like it's a total shot in the dark a lot of times, just as far as if it hits or if it pans out. But the guy that I kind of think of when I look at Jeremiah McClellan's tape, it's not just because I'm a 49ers fan, but maybe a little bit of Deebo Samuel. And Deebo Samuel is like the most prolific, one of the best yards after catch receivers in the NFL. But I think his ability to get going after the catch is part of what really makes him valuable. And that's super, super important in any wide receiver, but especially if you're looking at where Oregon's at right now and where they're going to be at the quarterback spot. I'm not necessarily sure if Pellum's a guy who plays super early. Maybe he does. I think I need to do a little bit more digging there to see kind of what he projects as, but if you can get really, really good skill talent, it's no secret that it takes the pressure off of your quarterback. So let's just say hypothetically here, he takes a red shirt and then is seriously involved in 2025 when Dante Moore maybe projects to be your starter. I think you're only going to be adding more, weapons for Dante hypothetically or potentially down the line to work with, which is going to make his job easier and ultimately result in you having a more potent offense.
Yeah, and when you talk about Oregon's offense, I kind of like that comp that you made there with Deebo and then the 49ers offense. I mean, you've seen it with Oregon's offense. There's been a lot of receivers. You saw with Troy Franklin. You saw with Tez Johnson. You saw Trayshawn Holden. I mean, these are guys that are yak receivers. When they get the ball in their hands, they're going to make a guy, one or two guys miss and get a couple extra yards at least. And so if you keep that going with the type of recruits that you're getting, I mean, it definitely does make it easier for Dante Moore to make some magic happen. And then he did talk about one of the main reasons that he went to Oregon, or during his transfer portal era, the couple weeks that he was in there, he talked about wanting to be behind a veteran quarterback or be in a good QB room so he can develop after getting some starts at UCLA and getting some experience. So, I mean, you talk about that, putting him in a good situation with receivers that can make moves, get those extra yards. I mean, definitely does make it easier on him.
So the Jeremiah McClellan edition is just absolutely huge. I think the intel that I had kind of gotten on this one that I can share here that maybe made this one a little bit more interesting in the days and hours leading up to it was I was kind of being told that he was ready to go and ready to make this flip, but maybe there was a little bit of hesitation on the family side as far as distance goes. And it's interesting where we find ourselves at because, like we talked about again earlier, where is Oregon going to be playing in 2024? In the Big Ten. And they're going to be playing against teams like Ohio State and Michigan and Michigan State, Penn State. So you kind of wonder here, especially with a guy that's located there, maybe that move to the Big Ten helped them again, right? I talked about in the summer, late summer, early fall, when Dakota Fields flipped his commitment from USC to Oregon, that move to the Big Ten was a green light for him to go ahead and commit. And if there is kind of distance to overcome, as there was here with Jeremiah McClellan and Oregon, I think that could be something that maybe helps put the family at ease a little bit more because their schedule, as weird as it is now, they're in the Big Ten, it's going to be taking them out there. So maybe just a little hidden bonus there in that recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it, definitely playing in the Midwest, you're going to be able to get recruits where their families, they might not be from the West Coast and they're from the East Coast or Midwest area where they're like, okay, well, at least we can go to some of your away games with these schools near us. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say it's good at the Oregon's going to the Big Ten. We can talk about that at a later date, but you're definitely seeing some of the benefits with these recruits that Oregon has gone this past year.
Well, flip number one of the day for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Jeremiah McClellan flips from Ohio State to Oregon, and he will be playing his ball in the Big Ten, but it's for the Ducks. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. We're talking about the next big addition for the Ducks on the other side of the break right after this. Welcome back to the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, talking with Israel LaRue about Oregon's big day one of the early signing period. We just talked about former Ohio State wide receiver commit Jeremiah McClellan flipping and signing with the Oregon Ducks. Big part of that, the letter did come in. I know that some Oregon fans might have been a little bit concerned after what happened with Peyton Bowen last year, going from Notre Dame to Oregon to Oklahoma. But Jeremiah McClellan signed, sealed, and delivered. Now we're talking about commitment number 2, Long Beach, California, Millikan High School wide receiver Ryan Pellum has flipped his commitment from the USC Trojans to the Oregon Ducks as Junior Adams strikes again. Twice is nice. 2 is better than 1. Whatever you want to put on there this was a huge statement for the Ducks with a recruiting rival, Pac-12 rival, now Big Ten rival in USC. We know that Junior Adams has made California his home state, obviously a huge part of his recruiting footprint. And this was a really big one. I mean, I was able to go to Millikan for this commitment ceremony. And it was an interesting kind of time because I pre-wrote the story before I left. And then I got there and I was kind of thinking, well, maybe it's going to happen. I feel like there's so much smoke that, around this recruitment as far as maybe it could happen. And then Will Stein dropped that tweet. Actually, maybe let me see if I can pull it up here to show the folks. I was on my way to Millikan when Stein tweeted this out. It was a little GIF of the Grinch. So give me just a second here while I put this up. I don't know if you knew the timeline of events with this is, but here's the tweet that he put up. This was like 15, 20 minutes before Pellum was set to sign his national letter of intent. So once I saw that, I was thinking, okay, is it going to be Pellum? Or are they going to do something crazy with Jordan Seaton? Well, it ended up being Pellum. I don't want to take up too much time telling the story, but when I was there, he was the fourth signee to kind of get the stage, take the platform, take the podium, and just say a few words and then sign his letter. And he said, well, you see all my teammates here. They all have their, jersey or, their school on their little placard that they had, but I don't. And then he said, now I'm going to be telling you guys, I'm going to be flipping my commitment from USC to Oregon and signing there. And people were shocked. People were pretty shocked. I know that was kind of a lot of the response I was getting after I put that video out, seeing that it's a LA guy going away from LA to play for the Ducks. But man, what a huge addition Ryan Pellum is to this 2024 class for Oregon.
Definitely the second biggest splash of the day when you talk about that flip, just because of the uncertainty of it. And then, I talked a little bit earlier, but that pipeline that Oregon has with SoCal, getting a lot of recruits. You talk about, I feel like it started with Kayvon back in the 2019 class when they got the #1 athlete in California. And then since then, they've kind of been hammering that SoCal recruiting area. And they even had their former players talking about, hey, if you want to play for a real school, if you want to play for somewhere where your friends and family from SoCal can be proud of, go up to Eugene, which is weird because you would never have heard that years ago. Because when you talk about SoCal, usually those hometown kids, they want to go to USC, they want to go to UCLA, they want to represent the hometown. But now I feel like Oregon's gained that traction with SoCal to where it's a destination for highly touted recruits where they want to go. And then you talk about getting flipping another receiver. Junior Adams has done an amazing job today. And then you talk about the other 3 recruits that he got. Oregon's 2024 wide receiver recruiting class, it went crazy. And it's a big part of the reason why Oregon jumped up all the way to the number 3 recruiting class of this year. Who would have ever thought that? They just jumped up so high, right behind Alabama and Georgia. And you talk about those 2 teams. Those are 2 big SEC teams where they recruit really well year in, year out. And then you have Dan Lanning, obviously, from Georgia. And he's building something, not only what you see with the defense and the kind of players he's getting at transfer portal, but you talk about recruiting too, where he's just on another level from these other Pac-12 schools and now going to the Big Ten. He's even separating himself from those Big Ten schools.
And Southern California is obviously super interesting because it's become such a big pipeline for the Ducks. California has kind of always been the West Coast nucleus, if you will, of Oregon's recruiting class, kind of dating back all the time. But Southern California in particular is a really interesting one because I think it really kind of kicked into high gear under Mario Cristobal. And during that time, USC was kind of down, right? Clay Helton was struggling with the Trojans, and Oregon was able to capitalize. So you see what they've been able to do with top-notch skill talent, whether it's wide receivers or some cornerbacks, a quarterback in Achilles Smith Jr. out of San Diego, committed in the 25 class. Oregon's hammering this area. And that's a huge part of why I chose to move out here. So, just a personal note, this is why I think days like today are so fun, because I was able to go see some of this in person. But to talk a little bit more about Pellum, just to kind of get into a little bit of eval here, his older brother, Romeo Pellum, who's also his head coach at Millikan, he described him as lightning in a bottle. And I think that's really kind of what he brings to the table. I think you have a silky smooth route runner, someone who has really, really good body control, great hands, twitchy guy. I saw him in a game against Long Beach Jordan that it was like a 50-point shootout, and he was playing some receiver, making plays. He was playing some DB and making plays. And I remember he had one huge play where he chased a guy down from like 30 yards or something out and then punched the ball loose. They actually ended up calling a horse collar, but it was just one of those plays where you're like, my God, that dude just made it happen. So incredibly versatile. He can do a little bit of everything. You see the juke right there, just the ability to keep the play alive is pretty phenomenal. So I think it's obvious that Ryan Pellum has the potential to be a very special player for Oregon.
Yeah, and you talk about the receivers that are leaving in Troy Franklin and others, and you just look at it and say like, okay, well, Oregon, they've kind of reloaded, and honestly, they didn't really need to at the receiver position having Jurion Dickey. But I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm just really excited to see how this specific wide receiver class pans out in the coming years, and seeing if any of them get some playing time like Troy Franklin did his first year. I mean, Troy obviously going to the draft, but he was a very special talent and someone who made an impact right away as a freshman. So I'm interested to see if any of these receivers can do so as well.
Another thing I'm really excited about with Romeo Pellum is Ryan Pellum is just you've heard about feed the studs, that kind of offensive mentality or philosophy, and that's certainly what we saw this past year from Will Stein. I mean, Troy Franklin really led the way statistically, but you saw the Ducks get a huge contribution from Tez Johnson, so we know that more than one guy can eat in this system. And 5'11", 175 pounds is what you're looking at with Ryan Pellum. So I think he could definitely be a guy that carves out a role. It's hard to say how many guys are necessarily going to play early, especially when it comes to the wide receiver spot, because Troy Franklin played early, but it wasn't in a huge feature role. And that was a totally different deal because the Mario Cristobal offense didn't really lean on the pass at all. So it's going to be a different deal. And then we didn't really see Jurion Dickey play too much this year. You know, he was kind of banged up, and I think a lot of people see a 5-star and they just automatically think, oh, he's going to start or he's going to play a lot. So maybe it makes sense to temper some expectations there. But I think that the Ducks obviously continue to stay involved here with Ryan Pellum. I think I was hearing the chatter about him maybe one and a half weeks ago. So they kept going, and obviously it paid off in a big way with the commitment on Wednesday.
Yeah, and just again, I mean, taking a recruit from USC, I mean, if you're a Duck fan, you got to be cheering because you got a recruit from Ohio State and from USC. I mean, you're already making noise heading into the Big Ten. And USC, I don't know, I kind of feel like they thought they could kind of dodge Oregon for a little bit, moving conferences, and then Oregon a year later obviously changes conferences. So, I mean, USC and UCLA are going to have to deal with Oregon not only on the field but on the recruiting field as well for a long time to come.
All right, let's see what else we can get into here. Another note I probably should have gotten into earlier, maybe for some of our longer time Oregon fans. Ryan Pellum is the nephew of former Oregon linebacker coach Don Pellum. So you see the family name there, the family legacy that he'll have the opportunity to continue upon arriving in Eugene. I was able to talk to Romeo Pellum after Ryan's commitment. I also have an interview with Ryan up on ducksdigest.com. So make sure you go check that one out and give it a read. It is free. Right now, it's looking like Pellum is planning to play in the Under Armour All-American Bowl, but there's still a possibility that he could join the team and enroll with the Ducks in time to join Fiesta Bowl practice. But we do know that he's going to be enrolling at the very latest on January 8th. So still a little bit up in the air as far as when he's ultimately going to get to Eugene, but it sounds like he's going to be a winter enrollee, which is great for the Ducks. You always want to get those guys in the fold. It kind of feels like an extra, not a spring necessarily, but just getting that extra time, getting those guys acclimated is going to be tremendously valuable to just kind of getting them going and ultimately seeing if they can kind of contribute in 2024.
Definitely. I mean, I always like seeing recruits getting it in the winter because you talk about it. They get the extra practice in, get settled into the offense if they're on the offense, defense if they're on the defense. And then you talk about the spring game too. I mean, getting to play in there too. I mean, I feel like that's some valuable experience, especially for the newer guys.
Absolutely, it is. So just to kind of wind down a little bit on today's episode of the pod, I know you referenced the rankings there a bit earlier. I think right now it looks like 247 has Oregon's class at number 5. I did see them at 3 earlier. I think there just might be a little bit of fluctuation because guys are still flipping, guys are still committing across the country. So we'll see what happens. But as of right now, 4:53 p.m. out west, the Ducks have signed their entire 2024 recruiting class, whether that's from the prep ranks or the one JUCO guy they have, Sione Laulea the third from College of San Mateo. The Ducks already have that in the fold, and they're still working with a number of top transfer portal targets, whether you're looking at Derek Harmon, the Michigan State defensive line transfer, or another guy like Walter Nolan, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Oregon is still very much pursuing guys now in the transfer portal. And then aside from those guys, it's on to the 2025 class is. So however this app wraps up, it really does look like Dan Lanning is more than likely going to be the first coach in program history to sign a top 5 class, which has really been rarefied air.
Yeah, I feel like everything that Dan has been doing, I mean, you talk about rarefied air, stuff that he's done in his first 2 seasons, with the transfer he's gotten, with the way that he's gotten the team to play so quickly, bolstering the defense. I mean, you talk about those 2 potential transfers on the D-line. I mean, that would really help the D-line with a lot of guys leaving. But, I mean, you talk about it. This year's done. It's on to look into 2025 now.
All right. So there is one more guy that we should just mention super quick before we hop on out of here. That is 2024 Fairfield, California, Armio defensive lineman Jericho Johnson. He is set to announce his college commitment tomorrow. That's Thursday, December 21st. So make sure you guys stay tuned in for that announcement. He is working from a top 4 of Oregon, USC, Washington, and Utah. I've had my pick in on Oregon for about 2 months now, I want to say. And based on the latest that I'm hearing, I still think that Oregon is in a great spot to add him. But before we get out of here is let the people know where they can find you and kind of what you got going on in this space.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter at Israel_LaRue. Just helping Max out, putting out the news, keeping Oregon fans updated on everything from recruiting to transfers to in-game analysis. I mean, we're doing it all. We're grinding, and we're excited to do more stuff for you guys.
Right on, right on. Well, make sure you guys lock in with Iz. He has been doing an awesome job. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, he had a story about Oregon signing Dylan Gresham, a wide receiver, big deep ball threat from San Jacinto, California, holding off a late push from Arizona and USC. That was kind of an underrated storyline, I think, from the day. Being able to hold on to every commit that you had was absolutely phenomenal for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. But if you guys want to find more of me, make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. I think we're like 2 subs away from 3,000, and that's been the goal that I've been driving for. So really appreciate your guys' support. You can read all of my work covering the Ducks over at ducksdigest.com. And then do me a favor, share the show with your friends, with other Duck fans, and with your family. But until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.